Let's Talk Native is produced at the LTN Studios on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We break all the rules for Native media by peeling back the layers of assimilation and indoctrination. No prayers, no buffalo speeches, and no spirituality shows. While this podcast does not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do take a tough look at history, oppression, and our survival. We highlight the voices of Native activists, writers, poets, artists, thinkers, and musicians who are fighting for the rights of indigenous people all over Turtle Island. We may step on a few toes through our examination of culture, art, politics, history, and identity. But the real goal here is to bring our people together by breaking down what separates us. In this moment of historical change and social justice, our voices matter now more than ever before. So, welcome to Let's Talk Native with John Kane.
There you go. And as he said, welcome to Let's Talk Native. Look, I got a special show going on here today, but before I get right into it, first let me say, I didn't realize until yesterday when I checked the calendar, but this show represents our first show in our 11th year of doing Let's Talk Native. So we just celebrated our 10th year anniversary, just the other day. So I'm pleased to be able to have been able to do this for this long. We are in a better spot now to keep going, and we don't have some of the barriers that we had before. And, look, there's always something to talk about. There is always an issue, and that's why we do this program, not just to inform people, but to encourage people to have conversations. So, again, I'm pleased. I'm happy. And, I got a few congrats on Facebook and that kind of stuff. I wasn't searching for that. I just really wanted to demonstrate that we have had the staying power to not only go from commercial radio, change a couple of stations, improve, the product as we went along, and to be where we're at now with podcasts and YouTube videos and being carried by radio stations. We're still doing it. So, excuse me. So yeah, this is our first show as we enter our 11th year. So I'm pretty pleased with that, and we do have a very special show. Look, we have talked about the legacy of Genozode Oka, and while on some level it seems like there hasn't been the necessary lessons learned from that event. But it's not to say that everybody hasn't learned lessons. And in fact, we've seen it demonstrated. We saw in the support for Wet'suwet'en before the whole crisis pandemic thing began to rain down upon us. We saw the reciprocating support, shutting down rail, Canadian rail. What is it called? Rail Canada? I don't know. And highways and that kind of stuff. And we're seeing it play out again. Caledonia has been in the news in the past, and it's in the news again. And that's why I have my guest. I've got Skyler Williams joining me from Six Nations, from Oswego, Grand River, whatever people want to, however you want to refer to it, I guess. And this is the first time Skyler's been a guest on my show, so I want to first off welcome you, Skyler, to Let's Talk Native. It's a pleasure to have you join me.
Absolutely, thank you for having me. And I'm joined today with my friend Myka, who's also been helping with some of the media stuff down here at 1492 Landback Lane.
Well, and actually, that's what I'm referring to this program as. It's great that you guys, basically created the address that is a call to action all by itself. So I think what you guys are doing is great. But I want to talk about it. I want you to lay some of it out, because a lot of my listeners are on the American side, and they're listening all over the United States. So I want you to kind of give as much as you can a background. We have about an hour program, but I know that we could spend hours talking about this. So give a little bit of the history, and I'll chime in where I think it's appropriate. Give a little history on what has led to where you're at right now.
So yeah, the 2006 is kind of where it started, I guess, when Caledonia kind of first got put on the map with like Indigenous resistance around Six Nations. Anyway, it was in 2006. There was a group of women that went into housing development and started passing out flyers, and were met by some very angry construction workers. There was one point a dump truck with gravel that poured the gravel at their feet, and so it angered some of the people from Six Nations, and we went in and escorted the construction workers off site, and that was kind of the start of the work stoppages and stuff that had been happening around that time.
Well, let's back up a little farther, because basically what we have to explain is that the reason that any of this conflict has started in the first place is that there is housing development for non-natives on not just disputed land that is almost, I mean, it's only disputed because Canada made it disputed. When you think about that whole Haldeman tract of land that was clearly designated for the people of Six Nations, going back to the British Crown, and the fact that as a people, there was some agreement, and I'm always somewhat skeptical on some of what where leadership has led some of our territories, but there were lands that were leased. They were leased out to non-natives for development, but those leases were never fulfilled. They were defaulted, and some of those leases were like 999-year leases, which is absurd on so many different levels. And then they defaulted on them, and they were never forced to leave the land. And so that's how the land only becomes disputed, because white people who entered into what was leases, even drafted up by Canada, by the way, they defaulted on them, and Canada never forced them off the land. And that's where, and then the land changes hand. They treated that lease like a sale. And so now you've got a bunch of people who paid somebody for that land, but it never came back to Six Nations, and none of those sales were legitimate. And so now you've got somewhat, nice homes, fairly luxury homes being built on land that is essentially part of Six Nations. Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I mean, like the one that I like the reason that I brought up the 2006 reclamation of what was Douglas Creek Estates, is now Gunastado, is because this particular development rolls up right to the front door, directly across the road from that development. And so to be able to, and that was something that I was involved with. I spent like a year occupying that particular little tract of land there, and 7 months in jail because us fulfilling our obligation to the great law and to our people and to the land itself is criminalized. And so it ended up being that all of the charges that I was charged with over that was all dropped afterwards. And I thought that was a pretty big slap in the face to roll another development of 1,400 homes, which is twice the size of what was Douglas Creek was, directly to the front doorstep.
Well, and after, and there was a major conflict in 2006, and that was fairly well covered. I mean, and frankly, the internet was, our access to internet was, we almost cut our teeth on some of that dispute. And
Absolutely.
So out of that dispute, they stopped development, and now they've started back up. And is that correct?
Yeah, and that's the thing is like over the last 5 years or so, like the encroachment of these massive housing developments has gotten closer and closer. And so in Canada we have something called an additions to reserve process, and it's a ridiculous joke of a process to get land added onto the reserve. And the Band Council, the Confederacy Council, have bought land trying to get that added onto the reserve with no luck whatsoever, and we just end up paying property tax on lands that are well within the Grand River Haldimand deed. Mm-hmm. And so it just becomes we are paying taxes on our own land.
And so for people on the U.S. side, that process you talked about is kind of like the fee to trust process that exists on the U.S. side.
That's
where
right.
Where people acquire land and then they don't actually get the clear title to the land, even if it was in our traditional homelands. We are forced to try to have the federal government hold that land for us, and that's the way Canada tries to view many of the land holdings that Native people have on the Canadian side anyway. But it is absurd that rather than ever resolving the dispute. And it's not like the Canada hasn't acknowledged this dispute. I mean, this has been raised for years. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Canada has offered some ridiculous buyouts of these claims in years past for like hundreds of dollars per acre rather than the thousands of dollars per acre that it would ever be worth. I mean, it's kind of, that is a slap in the face as well. They've been almost saying like this is all we're ever going to give to you. It's kind of like the Black Hills or the Dakotas. You take this money now, or we're never going to offer it to you again. And then our people look at and $2 million or whatever. That sounds like a lot of money to an impoverished people, but it's money that just disappears after that. And so they know that this is disputed land. So when I hear somebody like Doug Ford, saying something like, well, you just can't go in and take somebody's homes away, or, and I'm thinking that's exactly what you guys did. And then when I hear any of these guys talk about rule of law, they have violated their own laws. They're the ones violating their own rule of law. And the expectation is that we will follow their law when we never consented to any of that stuff. And it really comes back to, doctrine of Christian discovery and, so many other, so much of the dogma that allowed Canada and the United States to take over our lands illegally and then claim that they have a legal title.
Yeah, and I mean, like, this has been the same for the Haldimand Tract, like for the whole thing, like for geography's sake, like it's goes almost to Buffalo from just west of Toronto. And so we're talking about hundreds of miles of river that we have 6 miles on either side of. And
that is what the Haldimand Tract lays out. It says, and this was clearly delineated by the UK that land 6 miles on either side of Grand River was forever supposed to be in the possession of the people of Six Nations, even though when I look at the Haldimand Tract, they don't accurately reflect where the source of Grand River is, so they even cut the top off of that too. But regardless, when you look at how extensive the Haldimand Tract is compared to what's left of our territories, it gives you an idea just how much we've been screwed from by Ontario, by Canada, by by land speculators. It's really criminal for these people who are claiming that we need to follow rule of law.
Absolutely, and I mean this, like I was saying before, this particular one is 1,400 homes, and I think the starting price for one of the units of a 5-plex apartment in there is $420,000. The amount of money that they gave to the band council, which on our territory is voted on by 4% of our community, the $352,000 that they received for that isn't even it doesn't even scratch the surface of being able to buy one of these homes.
Yeah, they pay less than one home for like an entire settlement. It's you're right. It's absolutely absurd. Well, and look, and we can get into. I have some serious problem not just with these Indian Act band councils, but frankly, I have just as much trouble with some of these guys that claim to be traditional council because they seem to have lost any sense of the responsibilities that come with titles. They think they're in positions of authority. They can make decisions that leave the people out. They're not following Guyana or Goa. So whether you're talking about band councils or you're talking about chiefs councils or whatever you want to refer to them as, I guess, there's a lot of problems that exist on when it comes to those that either are recognized as leadership or who are claiming to be recognized as leadership.
And I agree with you 100%. And that was kind of one of the things that, like, when we started here, that was something that we weren't going to align ourselves with any kind of family or faction that was put here on Six Nations. And certainly whether that's elected council or the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Council or the Mohawk Workers. Because that's the thing, is like the government here and the police and the RCMP before the Ontario Provincial Police all, look for those cracks and to be able to drive wedges in.
Right.
And they hammered those home at every opportunity. And as far as I'm concerned, it's taken 100 years for us to get as divided as we are as a community. And and if it takes 100 years more for us to do the growth and the healing that we need to do as a community, then that's what we're going to do. And we're going to take that 100 years to be able to, but in that time, there's not going to be development rolling up on our doorstep to be able to build these 1,400 homes and put 1,400 families on our doorstep.
Right. Well, so let's bring us forward here now. When the first blockades or you guys basically drew a line in the sand was only about a month ago. Back us up a few weeks to where the current blockade where it comes from.
So yeah, just some friends and family, and we talked and made a decision that this was something that we wanted to do. The Wet'suwet'en had just kind of came and went after the coronavirus hit, and so there was a group of us that were action oriented, wanted to make a move towards a Landback issue, and really take that seriously and move into a space that we could hold on to. And this particular one, because it was rolling up on the door of the former Douglas Creek, now Ganastado housing development, like it was an easy one to pick, because it actually rolled up right to the doorstep of Ganastado.
Right. So you guys started first off just making sure that you were seen there. You guys started a bit of a fire, more of a symbolic fire.
I was gonna clarify. Like, are you asking about the occupation itself, or are you asking about the blockades? Because those are two sort of separate entities. I mean, although they're connected, they're separate.
Well, by all means, explain that then, because basically part of what I'm trying to find out is where we're at now. What are the recent events that bring us to where we are now?
Okay, so originally, what we did is we came on to develop the development property site itself, and we set up like an occupation there, and we've been there since. So fast forward last Wednesday. The OPP came to the development site where we have been staying, and they started, they came to like enforce the injunction essentially, right? So that it ended up becoming violent on behalf of the police. So they shot at our people and they tasered some of our supporters, and then they ended up detaining 9 people who were on site.
Well, and to be clear, this is much of what people have seen on the U.S. side. They're shooting with what were supposed to be less than non-lethal armaments. They're using these beanbags or rubber bullets or whatever else. Although those things can be lethal.
They only shot one bullet, right?
Wait, say that again?
I don't know where you would just shoot one bullet, but I assure you it was more than just one.
Okay. So anyway, they came in, and they came in clearly with the intent to be violent. And in fact, if I recall, Skyler, we spoke. You mentioned that that they were trying to suggest that you get rid of the women and children because they were going to come in and they planned to physically, and violently enforce, some Canadian paper they had.
And that's right. And the first thing that they did was a non-Native woman who was standing next to the roadway, not on the site at all, had her phone out and was videoing and live streaming what was the happenings. And as soon as they approached the site, they grabbed her immediately, picked her up off the ground, slammed her onto the ground and into a big mud puddle, and arrested her immediately. And she wasn't even on the development site at all.
Jeez, I recently did a video. I do short form videos, and I did one called "This Is Canada," which the whole intent was to show the overt racism especially that the police harbor against Native people, and for all the people in the U.S. side who think, oh, Canada's so nice. I'm always there to say, no, you guys are not getting the full picture. And whether you go back to the Oka Genozode Crisis, or whether you look at what's happened with Sowetan, or what's transpiring with the blockades that you guys put together in support of Wet'suwet'en, and of course now Canada really shows its true nature when even in the face of, again, peaceful protests.
And that's the one thing that, like, I think you just highlighted there, is the peaceful protest. Is until the police moved in here, like, it was sitting by the fire and singing songs and dancing and laughing and telling stories, and it was as peaceful of land occupation as you could get.
Well, and it still is, right? So, like, to go back to, like, the timeline, so in regards to, like, what you see on the media with the blockade, so, like I said, we had just come in and we were here and we were occupying. Like, we had never like barricaded any roads or anything. Even the driveway has always been open. I mean, like, when it comes to the nighttime, we have somebody that will sit up there and sort of, like, monitor the people that are coming in, but, like, we've never shut down any roads in regards to Mackenzie Meadows. And like I said, the driveway is open. But fast forward to the day of the arrest. So it was a beautiful, beautiful community response that when the barricades came up and, like, the blocking of trains and the fires and everything. And that was in direct protest and support of our community, of the violence that the police brought to the land defenders.
But even in that, you guys still didn't have a violent response. You just had a larger response, a larger peaceful response, even after the violence perpetrated by the Ontario Provincial Police, which is essentially like, for those on the U.S. side, it's like the state police for all intents and purposes.
That's right.
Yeah, and so then to fast forward after that, so the same night, all of the people who had been arrested were let out of jail, and at that point, it was the same as the first day. We regrouped, we had a caravan, and we just essentially came back onto the land. Everything was still there, so we just kind of sat down, lit the fire again, and carried on. And again, still to this day, we're not blocking any roads, we're not impeding traffic. And you're not
destroying construction sites. I mean, Ford makes it sound like you went into somebody's home, for crying out loud. And of Doug Ford, I mean, who is the Ontario Premier, which is like the governor, again, for people on this side. So Ford makes it sound like you guys were like kicking doors in or something. And of course, that couldn't be farther from the truth.
Absolutely.
No, there's not one home on the development site.
Right.
Like, there's barely a road been, like, there's barely the roads that are going to be constructed, like, for the surveys and whatnot. Other than that, it's just dirt.
So what starts out as an occupation on this land that is intended to be developed, man, it sounds like occupied territory in Israel, where the Israelis go in to try to do settlements in Palestinian territory. It really is. But so what starts out as basically a sit-in, for all intents and purposes, invokes a violent response from the Ontario Provincial Police, and the response from your community is to say, all right, now it's not just an occupation. Now we're going to do some blockades. Is that accurate?
Well, and that's the thing, is, like, the community tried to respond to the reclamation site, and the OPP had large vehicles sitting on the roadways, blocking any entrance, any passage to where we were.
Now, what kind of vehicles were these? Just SUVs, or have they broke out the military style
SUV,
vehicles
like
yet?
tactical trucks. They're like they have like a dual wheel big Chevy and Ford F-350s and large tactical unit trucks. And so they blocked the roadways, preventing our people from coming to render any kind of aid. And so our community stood up in a huge way and said, like, if you're going to be shooting rubber bullets at people, tasering people, beating people, dragging them off the site, then we are going to maintain a direct route to be able to get to them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the highway and railway and roadway blockades have come in now. Mm-hmm. And so that was our community's response to violence against our people.
Sure, and of course that makes sense. Then there has to be a response to people being injured, and again with violence coming from the police. And violence totally uncalled for, unnecessary. It's necessary for a response. And the great thing is that it came from the people. It wasn't one of these band councils or chiefs councils. This was the people saying, no, we're not putting up with this. And I've seen some of the video and some of the live streaming stuff that's been made available. I want to give a shout out. I'm using some of Real People's media shots and video as we're doing this show. But and obviously then some news coverage started. I saw some APTN and a few other networks that were covering it. But again, it always seems like they're in such a hurry and such an effort to cast our people as the bad guys in all this stuff. And nobody goes back and puts a proper framework to the injustices that causes the land dispute in the first place. It's rarely ever done. At best, they'll call it disputed land. They won't talk about what the real history is. And of course, when the tribal councils get involved and these band councils get involved, they seem to be more like trying to placate the province or the Canadian federal government. And not necessarily make sure that they maintain a strong dialogue with the people they claim to represent.
So like this has been something that all of us at Landback Lane have been advocating for since the start of it, was that by not aligning ourselves with anybody, but at the same time like looking to those different families and factions within our community to be able to say, like, if we're going to do this has got to be for everybody. And so Myka and I went from door to door to all of these different interested parties and talked to Confederacy chiefs, Haudenosaunee Confederacy Chiefs Council, and band councilors, and band council chief, and Mohawk Workers, which is another kind of group down here, and went to them and asked them for their support, as well as the men. Men's Fire, yep. Mm-hmm. And so we went to all of those groups, and some more hesitantly than others, but all of those groups agreed with what we were doing. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great. Hey, we're at the bottom of the hour, so why don't we'll take a quick break here. I'll take a little musical break, give me a chance to get a drink and clear my throat, and then we'll be right back and we'll wrap up. I want to get into some other things. I want to talk about the legacy of Oka and all of that as it relates to where you guys are at now. So we'll do that when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. I've got Skyler Williams and Myka. I'm sorry, I didn't get the last name again. Myka?
That's okay. You can just
all right,
refer to me
Myka.
as
It is
Myka.
Skyler. I got Skyler and Myka from Six Nations talking about what's happening in the resistance to more Caledonia development. So we'll talk about that when we get back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. I want to give a shout out to my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. I want to thank Eric White and ERW Enterprises and the good folks at Grand River Enterprises for supporting this program, the work that we're doing here, the videos that we get out, the shows that we do in New York. And this show also airs in Washington, D.C. on WPFW. So I want to, again, I thank all, not just those sponsors, but others who help from time to time, Harry Wallace and, Ed Schindler, Cynthia Trice. I got different guys, different places who, when we need it most, and we need to buy another piece of equipment and improve what we're doing here, these guys step up. So I want to thank those guys in particular. There's things that affect what we do and when we do it, and sometimes those things are beyond our control, or they just happen. The timing just works out. One of the things that I've talked about in my show on any number of occasions is the recent social consciousness that has come, and the attention to racism that has come because of the murder of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement. We have essentially become beneficiaries of that movement. We've seen Columbus statues torn down. We've seen the Washington football team change its name. We've actually gotten a little bit more attention than our own actions have garnered by themselves. And without necessarily having to appropriate their movement, it's like it's almost like white people woke up a little bit. I mean, not all of them, but a little bit. And police violence has been highlighted, and you can't talk about police violence in the U.S. against black people without talking about violence against Native people, both in the U.S. and on the Canadian side. And that's, I mention that because I think there is a relationship there, and I think some of our people don't know how. There's a little indifference our people have in looking at what's been happening on the U.S. side with a lot of the the protests, even the riots that have broken out. But at some point, when there is such violent oppression, that these, even our most well-intended peaceful protests, sometimes we have to do more. And I'm not promoting violence. I'm not promoting vandalism, but there's a difference between a peaceful protest and nonviolent direct action, and we've seen that play out. I know, Skyler, you were at Standing Rock. You might be a little young for Genozode and Oka, which I think has created essentially a path or a legacy for many of us to respond to. And I think just like we've been the beneficiary of some of the movement in calling attention to to the racism that exists in the U.S. and Canada because of Black Lives Matter, they've benefited from our movements that we've initiated. So Standing Rock and Idle No More, and of course now the new movement is Landback, and that's why I think it's so great that you guys have located yourself at 1492 Landback Lane. So give me your thoughts on how this action now connects back to the Genozode Oka crisis.
Well, I mean, I think they broke some ground and kind of cleared the way for at least my generation to be able to understand like what no looks like. When we say no to development, like the gloves really do come off when it comes to Indigenous people and our connection to the land.
Well, and for those who may not be familiar on the U.S. side or wherever, the Oka Genozode Crisis was an attempt by the municipality of Oka, the mayor of Oka, trying to extend a 9-hole golf course onto Mohawk land in Genozode that our people did a peaceful protest to stop it. And in this case, it was the Quebec police, the SQ they call it, which is like, again, the Quebec state police or provincial police. They came in with intent to do harm. With they had militarized vehicles. They came in with assault weapons. They were firing shots, trying to kill our people. And that turned into a violent conflict. That turned into a conflict with the RCMP and ultimately the Canadian Army. But it's in a way, it's a very similar circumstance where there's development that is intended to be shoved down our throats, put on our doorstep, as you say. And what was demonstrated 30 years ago was that we could resist, and that we no longer had to take some cash settlement to solve any dispute, which is what they the Senecas here. They put a throughway through Seneca territory, and they paid them off $70,000 for a toll road that the United States, or that New York State, I'm sorry, has collected money off of for 40 over almost 50 years. It's absurd when you think about what the imposition that is that we've had to withstand for hundreds of years, but certainly even in the last several decades.
And well, this is the thing, right? Is when I can't say enough about how grateful I am to our community that they've stood up the way that they have to be able to make sure our safe passage to be able to gain access to and from the reclamation site here, and to be able to hold on to highway and train tracks and road that are clearly on our land. Mm-hmm. Without and that's the thing, is that the charges are always mischief charges. And so I was arrested the day of the raid, and told I was not allowed to come back or be breach of my bail and or my
release anyway.
The COVID coronavirus thing here has kind of made jailing people very difficult. And so I was released after only a few hours, 4.5 hours, and then we were able to kind of regroup and make our way back down to the site. And that's the thing, is our determination to make this part of our reserve, part of Six Nations territory once again, is undeterred by any police action. And there's nothing the courts or the can do to make us go away. This is Haudenosaunee territory, and it's going to remain that way.
Well, and again, as somebody who's been involved in a lot over the years, and I've had my challenges in the U.S. federal court system as a result of some of the things that I've stood for. I'm encouraged to see how many young people, and I know sometimes you guys don't feel as young as you really are, but for those of us looking at you guys and seeing these young faces really stepping up and doing, and not doing something that our generation is directing you to do, that you see this as a need and you guys are responding. I know you're trying to make sure that you respect the will of people who are older, and I know that's a challenge, because I know when we were involved in things when my generation was involved in things, it was very difficult, because we came from several generations of people who did not have that fighting spirit. They didn't enlist in the Canadian or the U.S. Armed Forces before they'd ever stand up to United States or Canada, and so there's a change that's happening, and you guys are actually taking that will to another level. You're going beyond where we went, and I'm proud of what you guys are doing. So tell me, where do you see things now? What are you anticipating in terms of response from the Ontario Provincial Police or from the province, or what are you guys kind of anticipating at this point?
So right now, in terms of the police, anyways, the developer here, as well as the county that we're in, have both applied to the courts and were granted injunctions by the courts, which is just a leverage by the developer and the county to be able to leverage the police to act on charges against us. And so in the meantime, all that is going on. We're still kind of going through our community, beating the unity drum as loudly as we can, trying to get those leaders to come up to the plate to be not adversarial anymore, but to be partners in a discussion and to try and make one voice moving forward, as opposed to kind of going around in the circle that we've been in for the last 100 years since the band council was enforced here at Six Nations.
Mm-hmm. Well, and part of the problem, really gets back to, this isn't even just about this development. This is about land that Canada has defrauded from your use. I mean, they've tried to play a game here and there is literally millions of dollars of taxes that they've collected, of lease payments that Six Nations was entitled to for the entire tract of land, and certainly the underlying title still should legally. It must remain with Six Nations, and so this isn't just about a development. This is a bigger picture than that, and I think what you're calling attention to is the injustice and how far back that injustice goes, and that whether they issue injunctions or try to hold you guys in contempt of court or charge you with mischief or whatever they're going to do, that this isn't a legal proceeding. This is a political issue, and the legal issue are the crimes that were committed against you, not your resistance to court injunctions.
Yeah, no, and that's what I mean. Is it becomes a really difficult thing because when we are victims as a community of that 100 years of trying to find any kind of legal avenue to be able to reclaim land. So just like any other city who wants to thrive and grow as a community, so do we. And us at Six Nations have seen over that last 100 years our community and our land mass shrink. And it's not because our population isn't growing. Our population is booming. But if we don't have a process to see land returned to us or lands added onto the reserve, and that was something we were kind of staunchly against too, was we're not about going up to non-native homeowners and saying, get out of your house, this is Six Nations territory. This is about land that is vacant, is agricultural land that was being used for planting and corn and beans and soybeans and wheat. And so we're saying that land that is mostly uninhabited, there's no reason that it can't be given back to Six Nations, and at the very least sold back to. And that's what some of the Band Council and Confederacy Council have been doing, is trying to buy back land so that they can try and get it added back onto the reserve.
Yeah, and even that process is like you said, it's an arduous task, and it's not usually successful.
It's never been successful here at Six Nations, never once.
And here's the reality. We go back to some place called Ganyonge, which was the only time that Native people went in and took land back. It still stands today, as one of the only places in the U.S. or Canada that Native people went in and retook land that was once theirs, and that community still exists. So the unfortunate part is, as much as we can look back at something like Oka and say, okay, there's a legacy there, we never created the Ganyonge legacy and fulfilled that look, it was said we need to reclaim land by hook or by crook. That was a Grand Council statement that was made back in the 70s, and
That's right.
we've never fulfilled that, and I think the idea of drawing a line in the sand, and as you said, you're just trying to stop them from creating permanent development on land that they clearly don't have the title to, and and shame on anybody who thinks that they can put the money up for a house or an apartment on land that is always going to be disputed. And I think any white person or non-native person who thinks that they're going to bully their way around. I know you guys went through some incredible conflicts with. I know there was that one big fat white guy that you guys were battling with in Caledonia who was so overtly racist. There you go. That's the name. That's the guy I was looking for.
Remember him very, very well.
I'll bet you do. But this is something that will continue to play out until Canada acknowledges that they have created this land dispute and they need to make it right. And I hope that I never call it buying land back. I have referred to it as paying white people to leave it. My good friend Sugar Montour, he always said that I've never bought land. I've always paid white people to leave it. And so I guess there's a time and a place for that. But in this situation, before this development proceeds and this vacant land turns into these $500,000 homes, you guys, it is really on you guys to stop it.
And I think that's exactly what we're saying. It's like that. If we can't come together as a community, then I'd hate to be able to have that conversation with my granddaughter or my great granddaughter one day, and tell her that sorry, honey, but there's no place for you to be able to build a home.
Right.
Because I was mad at the band council. I was mad at the Confederacy council. Or I was mad at somebody else or family in my community. That's an absolutely, what kind of dick would I be to sit there and look at my granddaughter's eyes and say, I'm sorry, I was mad. I can't talk to, we couldn't stand up for the land because we couldn't stop being mad.
Yeah. Well, and that's the bottom line. I mean, if we either fight for this or we don't. And so whatever divisions that were created and imposed upon us, whether it's Indian Act or whether it's how Canada or the U.S. Defines our lands, we have to come to one mind. Enough of us have to come to one mind that we become a force that Canada has to recognize, regardless of who they want to recognize in terms of band council chiefs or Haudenosaunee chiefs or whatever else. It has to be clear that the people have to be heard. And when I see what you guys are doing there and what took place in solidarity of Wet'suwet'en and what took place, again going back to Genozode and what Ganawage went through. There was so much solidarity from native territory to native territory. And it's funny because I look back in the wake of the initial wave of Idle No More, there was an effort by Canada to do a study. They have these Macdonald-Laurier reports, and one of these ones that was drafted by a guy by the name of Doug Bland was suggesting that he used an Ivy League model that would, when you put the data in, would tell you whether what was the likelihood of an insurgency, and Canada was met with a reality that the conditions that they created were creating a likelihood that there would be an indigenous insurgency that could take place any place or throughout Canada because of the conditions that they were forcing Native people to live, because of the disproportionate amount of Native people that were being imprisoned or murdered or missing, all of that stuff. And I think the non-centralized nature of what you guys are doing, where you're not creating a hierarchy to take a movement forward, leaves Canada not knowing what the hell to do. They want to be able to find kingpins and take them down just like they do on the U.S. side. And I think the fact that you've got a broad-based population support for what you're doing is really giving you guys strength.
Absolutely, and you know what? Like one of the biggest strengths that we have down here is the amazing women that we have down here. They have given us the direction and the willpower to be able to keep on moving forward with all of it. The strength of these women is amazing to me.
Well, and that's a generational thing too. I think we are seeing women of stronger will who are not going to. Look, we've had previous generations of women who are so worried that the men are going to get hurt, or they're so worried about their immediate household, and we've seen for decades now women who have stepped up more and more and more, and not only to support the men doing something, but they're on the front lines, side by side with us, and they become every bit as physical when need be, and again, it shows the level of equality that is part of our DNA. Something that frankly non-native people are not fully exposed to, and I'm impressed by that power and the strength of both the men and the women. But seeing the women being aggressive enough and not pulling us back and not pulling themselves back and basically asserting their will that's an encouraging thing to see.
But see, the thing here is I don't really think it's that so much about us women being just as aggressive as the men. I think it's, I have to give a shout out to the men that are participating in this with us. And it's not about us being aggressive, because we are about being peaceful. We try to be as least harmful, as least aggressive as absolutely possible. And I think it's the capability of the men to step back from that patriarchal idea that the men are calling the shots and they're leading the charge and they're the warriors. They are very, very mindful to listen to what we have to say. They're very mindful to come to us and ask for direction. And everything is done as a collective here. No one person ever just makes a decision. Everybody understands that we are all responsible and accountable to each other here. So it's very, very much the equity is on a completely different page in that aspect.
Well, and that's why I was talking about the decentralized nature of what you guys are doing, the fact that you aren't creating that hierarchy in decision making, that it is broad based, and that there is equity. I think you guys are doing it just right. I think you guys are doing a tremendous thing there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, again, I want to thank you guys. I'm obviously keeping tabs on this thing. We'll follow up if Myka, yourself, or Skyler, you want to come back and join me as some of these things, some of this plays out. I have a group page on Facebook that I share a lot of what you guys are posting up on your group page as well. This show, I'm hoping people will hear what you guys have had to say and understand what you're doing is a tremendous good that you guys are doing here. And anybody who has any doubts about that, I hope they hear what you guys have had to say here and what you guys are doing there, and know that you guys are truly looking out for the future generations and what you're trying to do. So I thank both of you. I thank all of you. I thank both of you for joining me, but I thank all of you there. And my props go to everybody who's stepping up.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
All right. Again, that's so that was Skyler and Myka joining us here on Let's Talk Native from Six Nations, otherwise known as Oswego or Grand River, and they're basically giving the account on what's happening in their attempt to stop unlawful development on disputed lands of the Six Nations. So we'll check back with them from time to time, and we'll see what the status is as we go forward. I want to thank you guys for listening. We'll be back here on Saturday. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.